thousands upon thousands more deaths. I don't think I fully reckoned with this until I saw the big data visualization project the New York Times put out on Thursday morning. The project tracks how the coronavirus spread around America and how we got to our current reality, where New York is somewhat on the mend, but huge parts of the rest of the country are just absolutely screwed. The Times project is worth going into, and if you want to get freaked out and scared, especially because half of it relies on invasive cell phone GPS tracking data. The Times did an expose about a few months ago. So we'll look past that for now because I want to talk about this. From the piece, quote, tracking signature genetic mutations of the virus allows researchers to estimate the influence of early outbreaks. Early on, variants prominent in Seattle's outbreak were found more frequently, but later samples found showed that a variant found often in New York City's outbreak had become much more widespread. A new analysis of thousands of mutations also points directly back to New York. So pretty much the way you could tell it was the virus had this mutation that were common in New York, and soon the virus that had the mutations that were common in New York were common everywhere else. So, that is the crazy situation. The timeline of the piece broadly looks like this. The virus just gets really bad in Seattle in late February and early March and starts to spread from there. But while it's doing that, COVID is also quietly exploding in New York and just getting absolutely massive, sickening thousands of people, while most of us just kind of bumble around figuring that the big jug of hand sanitizer at the gym is basically good and that de Blasio and Cuomo have their shit together. But no, like there was a big outbreak of, and if you talk to people like in and around New York City, they will tell you their stories. They will tell you times of like in like times as early as like February, where you saw these people like just get really, really sick. Not necessarily die, but just get really, 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 really sick. And you just didn't know. You didn't have the full benefit of understanding to see that this was coronavirus and what coronavirus was. People just got really sick. They lost all their sense of smell. They had all these like coughs and stuff like that. Just really bad versions of the flu. Like just kind of feeling like the worst flu that you've ever had. You know, like what we see COVID so often described as. But we did not know that at the time. We just did not know that at the time, and it's very, very clear that came back to hurt us. That is for sure. So, it's you can see how all these different types of things, and it's a really just devastating quote from Bill de Blasio on March 2nd. I'm encouraging New Yorkers to go on with your lives and get out on the town. And saying that, giving New Yorkers in that early period that push, that government-aided push to get out on the town is like probably one of the things that contributed to coronavirus spreading more than anything. Like that, from what we know in this New York Times story, from what it has been reported, and it's starting to trickle out now as we know more and more about the virus with each passing day, is that way that it was handled in New York caused it in no uncertain terms to get so big. People are like, it's not going to be that big. That early March period where it really exploded, that was just a devastating time period, like without a doubt about it. So, this is from the piece here. People leaving New York City made about 2.8 million trips to the Hudson Valley, and that is obviously like a huge point. Like New York City commuters, like a bunch of New York City's workforce lives in Hudson Valley. Some carry the virus with them, and outbreaks there accelerated in mid-March. The likely result of travel from New York, a Times analysis found. People also made more than 25,000 trips to New Orleans, where genetic data suggests that large early outbreaks stem from the infections from New York, according to Katharik Gangravarupu, a computational scientist at Scripps Research, and Dr. Bedford. So, the doctor in the story. Travel from the city helped spread that variant across the country. New York has acted as a grand central station for the virus, says David Engelthaler of the Translational Genomics Research Institute. More than 22,000 deaths in the New York City area could have been avoided if the country had started social distancing just 1 week earlier. Columbia University researchers estimate one of the easiest things to do, this is again from Jack Crosby here in Splinter, when things go wrong, is turn a structural crisis into one of personal responsibility. This is going to be a big part. Like, you're going to see a lot of leaders try and do this and people need to take this personal responsibility, and they do. They do need to be inside. But this is something that we just should not ignore. There are many groups who are trying to blame who are easy to blame during this pandemic. The Death Squad cosplayers trying to open the local Applebee's at gunpoint, the morons flooding Chelsea in East Village, and the second good weather hit, and the bars started going to do doing go margs and margaritas and stuff like that, and those fancy drinks. We all saw those stories, and of course the people with the protest as well, and we saw that, and I think it's a very, very illustrative of how where cases are rising now and like what the effect the protests had on that. But this is a narrative that works well for politicians. They can cast themselves, like Andrew Cuomo, as embattled leaders struggling very hard to keep everyone safe while pointing the finger at their enemies' missteps and blaming the consequences of their mistakes on the people that they affect. As the disease continues to recede in New York, Cuomo and de Blasio will almost certainly point to their actions as a model of resourcefulness in controlling the pandemic. They'll be very careful to separate their record from that of openly homicidal leaders like Texas's Greg Abbott or Donald Trump. Of course, Trump bears a good part of the responsibility because he did, in large part, what Cuomo and de Blasio did, but he just acted worse, gave Americans a false sense of security where they shouldn't have, and forced them to go out, helping also to make mask wearing a deep political issue, which is a huge problem. But this does not, of course, absolve us of our personal decisions, but what the timepiece shows in very clear, plain language is that Andrew Cuomo and Bill de Blasio also deserve an enormous share of the blame. Please keep that in consideration when you evaluate this. So if you traveled from New York City to another place in the month of March or April or May, you must live with the fact that you are probably demonstrably culpable in the spread of a virus which continues to kill. But the lion's share of that burden must rest on the people whose negligence and denial made that abandonment of personal responsibility incredibly easy. So, the people who knew before we did the consequences of the virus, what it really could bring, and their refusal to social distance and their pushes to get people out were huge in setting up New York City as a grand central terminal for the virus, as that doctor said, and killing so many people. The only thing we can do now is deny them the chance to take a victory lap over the 22,000 bodies that stacked up like cordwood in the back of their trucks. Thanks to their failure, the rest of the country has only barely begun to count. All right, I do want to talk now about the George Floyd protests, and this is a clip previously recorded. And after that, we'll talk about Iran and their murder and terrorism arrest warrant for President Donald Trump. Supreme Leader, welcome to the Resistance. Hello everybody, welcome to this video, and today I want to start out by talking a little bit about this tweet, which I think very accurately describes the state of the George Floyd Black Lives Matter protest movement and the way that it is trending right now. So, as you can see, I retweeted it. It starts off by saying, "Everyone, defund the police. Mayors, yes, we'll rename streets and paint murals. Everyone, no, we said duh. Celebrities, okay, we'll stop voicing cartoon characters. Everyone, that's not what. Hulu, fine, we'll remove the Golden Girls episode with the bun mask. Everyone, what's happening?" I hope you enjoyed my dialogue readouts there. It was very, very, very fun there to get my acting side. Yeah, I think when it comes to this broader movement, when we think about how it's going to end up turning up, and I think this question is broadly still up in the air, we have to consider what is happening right now, because the movement, obviously, I think everyone will agree, it started off incredibly strong, incredibly powerful, and inspiring. It is unforgettable the first time you watched that Minneapolis police precinct burn to the ground. It was a shocking moment. It was a crazy moment. It was a very awe-inspiring moment if you come from any kind of political position that's remotely similar to mine. And of course, if you're watching this channel, you probably would be, unless you're for some reason hate watching a leftist video. But where has it gone from there? There has been statues removed, which, I mean, I guess in some cases, when you're talking about some of the worst Confederate people, that is productive. But when you're bringing down statues of George Washington and bringing down statues of people like Ulysses S. Grant, you got to ask yourself, where is this going? Ulysses S. Grant did the most, probably more than any human being alive, to smash the Confederacy, and should be remembered pretty positively for it, if you're coming at this from any remotely logical position. And it's not just the people, too. On top of this, we see all these kind of, like, surface level change that is nice. It's really nice. Like, sure, I guess you can stop playing characters that aren't your race on animated TV shows. Like, that's all well and good. And honestly, the Hulu mud mask blackface thing, that was just incredibly stupid. But, like, why are these changes taking this direction? We don't know. It's kind of hard to answer, except for, wait, of course I have an answer. Why else would I be making this video if I didn't have an answer? I mean, come on, guys. Honestly, and again, to be quite honest with you, this is just my personal answer. It could be very wrong. Like, you could disagree, and if so, of course, encourage you to leave those disagreements in the comments. But when we look at the grand scheme of the George Floyd movement, how things have all played out, like, again, it all started out, like, pretty strong, pretty crazy. Like, you saw the tear gas and things like that. But then kind of, even police, like, they're not that dumb. They do tend to get the message after a while that the best way to stop these protests and eventually mollify them is to just not antagonize them. Let them play out. They will eventually kind of run out of things to protest and then move on to these relatively unimportant things. And they did this with the understanding that they were never really going to be defunded on a massive national scale because police have roles that are too important in society today. And it's not necessarily to protect people, not necessarily to protect the people that they think that they're serving in some of these communities. It is to protect the broader structure of the country, to protect law and order for the most powerful in the country, and to pretty much just keep things the way they are running. And if things are not kept the way they are running, then a lot of people are at risk for making a lot less money, and that is not a good situation that anybody in power wants to be in. So with that logic, of course, they were never going to defund the police. And with that and that kind of understanding now seeping through both sides, both the police and the protesters, well, what are you going to do? What is going to be the next course of action? Like, it's very hard to fully know. And that kind of sense of helplessness has just, and just really sense of just not knowing what's next or not knowing what to do, I think has made a large portion of this movement to a degree distracted and unsure of what to do next and what approach to take. A lot of people want to see that kind of change, but deep down in their hearts know that there really is no mechanism within the current governmental structure to achieve it. Sure, there could be some pretty nice police reform coming out of the House, but will it pass the Senate? Will it get past Donald Trump? Who knows? Like, it's very, very, very unlikely to see that, actually. It's probably not going to happen. Like, we do relatively have a pretty good understanding of that already. Like, so it's just, we don't really know we're at an impasse. We are at an impasse. So even if we are, which of course we are at this point, I would say, it's, I think, important to keep our eyes focused and not lose track of what really matters. And it sure is not, and as I think a lot of people understand this, the mud masks on Hulu. It's creating deep change. And that, in this case, means one thing. It means defunding the police. It means restructuring the way that they do business and creating a more fair, equitable way of doing things. And that is on a national playing field. Anything less will lead to the same sorts of systemic structural problems reoccurring, and then we have to go through the same thing all over again. It's not going to be this kind of very surface level change where like companies like Comcast have to be like, yay, we care about Black Lives Matter. No, like it's not going to be it. It's going to be something that I think a lot more people are a lot more uncomfortable with. You do see people like Comcast, you do see people like these major corporations saying that Black Lives Matter and kind of almost pretending to like deeply care about racism. But one thing they're not saying is the kind of defund the police movement. That's, I think, where you hit the real spot. That's where change is really made. It certainly is not through some of these directions that we're seeing now. I think it's very, very important. Keep your eye on the prize, stay focused, and let's look at this rationally. And let's look at the reality of what is actually going on. Just keep listening. It's the Spencer Walsh Radio Network.